Today I'm diving into everything that I read in February, from romantasy to cozy fantasy to a beach read to some classic literature. So let's get into it. Hey there, friends. Welcome back. Welcome to any new viewers. My name's Melissa, and welcome to Knits and Stories. Today I'm covering everything that I read in February, and I hope that you'll find something that you'll be interested in and want to add to your to-be-read pile. I'm starting with The Same Bright Stars by Ethan Joella. This was a 4-star novel for me. Now, I did like this book much better than the last book that I read from him last year, called A Quiet Life. This book we're following Jack, and Jack has inherited his family's restaurant. We're talking a restaurant at the beach in Rehoboth Beach, so not too far from me. And he's inherited his family's beach restaurant. He's third generation, and you can just tell that his heart's not into it, and he's being pestered by this larger conglomerate to buy the restaurant from him. And so we kind of follow his story as he kind of navigates not just what's going on in his everyday life, but also struggling to navigate whether that's something he wants to delve into. I think this is a perfect spring book to kind of get you in the mood for summer. Again, it takes place at the beach. It is a little bit of a slower paced book. His last one was that way for me as well. Great stories, but definitely not a fast paced book if that's what you're looking for. The next book that I read in February was The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. I loved this book. It was still a 4-star read for me because there were times that the pace of the book just kind of slowed down, or I just kind of felt like maybe we were taking a little bit of a tangent in the story. This is considered, or what I would consider, cozy fantasy. So you don't really have strong high world building. There's pretty low stakes, but we are following Tao, and she is an immigrant fortune teller, and she intentionally tells small fortunes as she moves from village to village because she told a big fortune when she was younger, and consequently her father died. And so she feels that it's her fault that she read this fortune and saw his death. So she's stuck to just small fortunes, and she moves from village to village before anyone really gets as those small fortunes start coming true, this way they don't come to depend on her. And on her most recent travels, she stumbles across a couple of gentlemen, and they end up traveling with her. And then they stop in a village, and they add a few more crazy characters to their band of travelers. So this is one of those stories that is really looking at found family and learning to navigate when you've been so secluded and kind of alone and living a lonely life. What's that like? And what do those people mean to you? So this is a really great book. It does have a little bit of a faster pace, but again, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because there were some lulls in the story for me, but I still really loved this book. The next book that I read was A Room with a View by Forster. This was my February pick for my book club that I call the Novel Women's Society. Every month, I've chosen a book that really focuses on the lived experiences of women. And it's all pretty much classic or modern classic stories that really focus on the experiences of women. So, A Room with a View, we're following Lucy Honeychurch, and she's vacationing in Italy, and she meets two men, George and Cecil, and she turns down Cecil's proposal a couple of times, and she finally accepts, but then once George finds out that she's accepted Cecil's proposal, he professes his true love for her, and we really spend a long time in this novel as she kind of is torn between what is socially acceptable versus following what will be her true happiness. And so this is a classic tale of the human struggle and, again, what is socially acceptable versus following what is probably your true love. I really enjoyed this book. This was a 4-star read for me. I felt like it was an easy read. Are there times that Lucy is annoying? Absolutely. But again, I feel like this was a really strong story that kind of emphasized how women of a certain era really had to weigh the consequences of marrying someone for love versus marrying someone when that's the one you're supposed to marry because that's what's socially acceptable. So the next book I read was actually the book that I had picked for January for my Novel Women's Society, and I chose To The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. And interestingly enough, a lot of people have never read this book or even heard of it in certain circles. But this was an interesting read for me because we're following the Ramsey family and other people that are vacationing on the Isle of Skye. And there's this trip to the nearby lighthouse that pretty much gets postponed. And it seems trivial, but it's something that the children really wanted to do. And this was a novel that really, for me, kind of struck a nerve because there were many times I felt exasperated with certain characters, but I really felt like Virginia Woolf really honed in on some of the trials and tribulations we have in our families, particularly when it comes to tensions between husbands and wives, parents and children. It can all get a little complex at times, and she did a really exceptional job of really examining family life and the conflicts that arise just from the simple differences between men and women. So this was, again, a 4-star read for me. I can't say that I necessarily want to read it again, but it did really examine those differences between men and women, and you could tell that the Mrs. Ramsey would get just as exasperated with her husband as I would in modern day times. So it really spoke to me that times really haven't changed a whole lot when it comes to the dynamics between men and women. I did feel that there were even moments in this book where Mr. Ramsey is mansplaining something to Mrs. Ramsey, and you just kind of roll your eyes because, again, as long ago as this book was written, we still face those challenges sometimes today. The next book that I read is Spells, Strings, and Forgotten Things by Brianne Randall. This is a repeat author for me. I think a lot of people have read her first novel that came out last year called The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic. And that book was supposed to be practical magic meets Gilmore Girls. And it kind of missed the mark for me. Was it an enjoyable book? Yes. I suspect for me it was probably more right book but wrong time for me, because I got an advanced copy of this novel and I was really looking forward to it, knowing that I did enjoy her first novel, but I didn't love it. So this one was marketed as Charmed meets not practical magic, Pride and Prejudice. And for me, it really worked for me. So we're following a coven of witches, particularly the household of sisters. There's three sisters, and their family has been tasked for generations to protect and cast these protective spells to protect this one tree that is a source of a huge amount of magical power. Things are starting to get a little wonky with it, and they're struggling, and they're struggling to keep those protection spells in place. One of the things that was unique about the magic in this book is they're considered like light magic witches, but every time they cast a spell, they have to give up a memory. And so there is another family that has kind of infiltrated town, and they wield dark magic, and dark magic is very powerful in this novel. And so this does have a romance in it, and we're of course following light and dark, enemies to lovers, kind of grumpy meets sunshine, and how they navigate to ultimately protect the magic that's emanating from this tree. I did give this 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. I think the dynamic between the light witch and the male figure from the dark magic family really worked for that whole Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth moment. So yeah, if you're into that kind of sort of retelling, I think this is a great book, particularly if you like witchy novels. The next book that I read was The Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood. This was a book that I listened to and I read the hardback at the same time, so I could just bounce back and forth. I thought this was going to be kind of a light and fluffy type of novel, and it was to some extent, but our female character, we're following her. She has this sudden accident and she dies, and she goes to this afterlife, and she meets like sort of like her mentor, and she meets this guy up there as well. They're kind of like in this waiting room, and she just thinks the guy is so charming. They have so much in common. And then lo and behold, him dying was purely an accident. It wasn't supposed to happen. So the mentor angel or whatever sends him back to Earth. And so she just feels like she's lost the love of her life. Like, what is she going to do? How is she supposed to spend eternity now that she's dead? So her guardian angel or mentor kind of says, hey, you can have, I think it was 10 days to go back to Earth, and you can find this love of your life and get him to kiss you, and then you can stay. So she takes her up on that. So we spend a huge chunk of this novel as we're following our character, one, trying to track down this guy that she only knows his name. She doesn't really know anything else about him. She gets the help of one of her neighbors who's kind of this cranky guy, but he's attractive. Lo and behold, you can guess it is another rom-com where Grumpy meets Sunshine. This was an enjoyable book. I can't say I loved it, but it was enjoyable, particularly when I was like dying yarn and listening to it on audiobook. So I'd probably give this 3 stars. I can't say that I didn't like it, but I didn't love it either. I could take it or leave it. The next book I read was the sequel to Heartless Hunter. I read Rebel Witch by Kristen Ciccarelli. I loved this book. But in all fairness, I loved the first one. Like, Heartless Hunter was a 5-star read for me. I couldn't put it down. This one was the same way. I did think this was sort of like I didn't like that you kind of had to have a good memory as to what exactly happened in the first book, because I started reading this and I was like, wait, what is going on? So I did kind of go back and watch a synopsis here on YouTube on Heartless Hunter to kind of refresh my memory, because it had been like a year since I had read it. And once I remembered where we left off in that book and where we were picking up, this one made a lot more sense. So just like Fourth Wing, I think it's worth, I don't think you need to go back and reread Heartless Hunter, but definitely go back and kind of refresh your memory if you read that first one and then read this one. It is a duology. If you loved that one, oh my goodness, you are going to probably love this one. I don't want to give too much away because that would ruin the first book for anyone who hasn't read it, but we are picking up with our 2 main characters. Basically, we have a witch and we have a witch hunter. And so Rune is a witch that is on the run. She's referred to as the Crimson Moth, and basically the country that she had been living was run by witches for a very long time, and the queen witch was just horrible. And so once she was overthrown, then we had all these witch hunters trying to hunt down all the witches and kill them. And so Rune is the Crimson Moth, and so she's been slowly but surely finding witches and smuggling them out of the country into other countries where it is acceptable to be a witch. And so we are still following Rune and Gideon, the witch hunter, and they still have a love-hate relationship with each other. But in this book, now they have to actually work together. So it is a fantastic ride. This is an extremely fast-paced book, and I'd say the last 25% of it, woo-wee, hold on to your head because it moves incredibly quick, and it was mind-blowing. So it is a duology. If you haven't read it, I would thoroughly encourage you to start with Heartless Hunter and then move on to Rebel Witch. It's a great romantasy series if you are a fan of romantasy. Not a lot of world building, not a ton of rules of magic or anything that you really have to dive deep in. It's pretty surface level, I feel like, in that regard. The next book that I read was called Beach Vibes by Susan Mallory. If you're at all familiar with Susan Mallory, she is pretty known for writing beachy novels. I have an advanced copy of the novel to read and review, so though it does seem a little early to be reading a beach read, I did really enjoy it. The thing about Susan Mallory books is though it is considered a beach read, it's not really light and fluffy. I mean, I want to say the writing itself is fairly simple. I don't think she doesn't have like a literary fiction style. I think her novels are really easy to read, but they're not fluffy. So we have our main character, Beth, and Beth is recently divorced, but she's also the owner of a sandwich shop at the beach that's really popular. Her parents, she had a really rough childhood, and she has a younger brother, and I want to say they grew up in foster care. Like, they had a horrible childhood. But in the midst of all of that, she saves money. She wants to go to culinary school. And her uncle, essentially, when she was younger, said, "Hey, I will help you if you buy into this family business, then I will help your brother go to medical school," her younger brother, which she was going to financially try and help him. And she still did. Whatever money she had saved, she went ahead and helped pay for her brother's medical school. On the flip side, she's a volunteer. She volunteers at the food bank. She meets this young gal there, and they become fast friends. Fast forward a little bit, and it turns out that her younger brother starts dating her best friend. And then she starts dating, unbeknownst to the others at the time, her best friend's older brother, whose wife is deceased. He has young children. So there's a lot of dating dynamics. At first, I was a little thrown off by the siblings dating siblings thing. But overall in the story, it worked. But what we do discover, and I'm not giving anything away, is that Beth discovers that her brother is cheating on her best friend. And so she really has to grapple with, what do you do? Because ultimately, this is a no-win situation. You tell your best friend, and then your brother hates you, or you don't tell, and then she finds out. Then what does that do to your relationship with your new boyfriend, who is her brother? So it's a pretty deep book, because you're looking at not just sibling dynamics, but you're dealing with people who are grieving. It was a pretty not challenging, but it was definitely a novel that really made you kind of look inside and kind of think about, where does your moral compass point on all of this, and how would you navigate this particular scenario? In the end, of course, there is a somewhat happy ending, but it is not your light and fluffy rom-com-y beach read. There are some deep undertones running through this, but I did really enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars. I would recommend it to anyone who's looking for maybe a more thoughtful beach read, either for on the beach this summer, or even if you're taking a flight somewhere and you just need an airplane read. I think this is a good one. All right, so that sums up. That's my February wrap up. I would love to hear what you think, if any of these novels spoke to you, or if there's something that you read in February that you think I would love to read. Please share it below. I love great book recommendations. Until next time, happy reading, happy knitting, and I'll see you next week.
Always think of you when spring comes, like it's something in the air at that time. Don't know why. Always dream of you when spring comes. It's like the heat on my skin.